curse from the past. If someone from your past suddenly reaches out after years of silence, be extremely careful. This true story happened to me in Mexico in 2017, and it turned my life into a living hell for 2 years that still haunts me today. My name is Elena, and what I'm about to tell you should serve as a warning to anyone who receives unexpected messages from people they once knew. Some connections are better left severed, some doors should remain closed, and some people carry darkness that can attach itself to your life in ways you could never imagine. It was July 15, 2017, exactly 3 days after we'd moved into our new house in Coyoacan, a historic neighborhood on the southern edge of Mexico City. The rain was hammering against the windows that night, the kind of torrential downpour that turns the streets into rivers during the summer monsoon season. I remember the exact time because I just checked my phone to see if Carlos had messaged about his flight landing safely in Guadalajara, 11:47 p.m. That's when the Facebook notification appeared. Roberto Delgado wants to connect with you. The name hit me like ice water. I hadn't thought about Roberto in over 12 years, not since his younger brother Miguel died from an overdose at 18. Roberto had been 2 years older than us, always lurking at the edges of our friend group during preparatoria, those final years of high school, that shape who you become. While Miguel had been warm and funny, the kind of person who could make anyone laugh, Roberto had always made me deeply uncomfortable. There was something in the way he looked at me like he was memorizing my face, cataloging my movements, filing away every word I spoke for some future purpose I couldn't understand. I should have deleted the request. God, how I wish I'd just deleted it and gone to bed. But guilt is a powerful thing, especially when it comes to the dead. Miguel had been my friend, and in my mind accepting Roberto's friend request was somehow a way of honoring Miguel's memory. Such a stupid, dangerous thought. The message came through within seconds of my accepting. Elena, que sorpresa encontrarte aquí. I heard you moved to Coyoacan. My grandmother lived there before she passed. Beautiful neighborhood, especially near the old cemetery. How are you finding the house? The specificity of his knowledge made my skin crawl. I hadn't posted about our move on social media. Carlos and I had deliberately kept it quiet, wanting to settle in before announcing our new address to the world. Our 4-year-old son, Diego, was starting at a new school, and we wanted privacy during the transition. Yet somehow Roberto knew not just that we'd moved, but exactly where. It's been a long time, Roberto. How did you know about our move? His response was immediate, as if he'd been waiting with his fingers poised over the keyboard. Mexico City is smaller than you think. A friend mentioned seeing you at the house near Panteon de Soco, the one with the blue tiles and the jacaranda tree in front. Must be fate that you ended up in my old neighborhood. My hands trembled as I read his message. He'd just described our house perfectly. The blue Talavera tiles that lined the entrance were distinctive, a remnant from the 1940s that the previous owners had preserved. The jacaranda tree was enormous, its purple blooms carpeting our front yard every spring. But we'd only been there 3 days. Who could have seen us and reported back to him so quickly? Carlos was away on business, a construction project that would keep him in Guadalajara for 3 more days. Diego was asleep in his room upstairs, clutching the stuffed rabbit he'd had since he was a baby. The house felt suddenly vast and empty around me, full of shadows I hadn't noticed before. The rain had intensified, and somewhere in the walls, pipes groaned under the pressure. The sound was almost human, like someone crying behind the plaster. That's quite a coincidence, I typed, trying to keep my tone neutral. It's a lovely area. We're still settling in. I'd love to see what you've done with the place. My grandmother always said that house had special energy. She was very superstitious, believed in all the old stories. Did the previous owners mention anything unusual about it? The question made me pause. The elderly couple who'd sold us the house had been eager to leave, accepting our first offer without negotiation. They'd moved to Querétaro to be closer to their daughter, they said, but there had been something in their eyes when they handed over the keys, a relief that seemed disproportionate to a simple real estate transaction. The wife had pressed a small wooden cross into my palm, whispering "Para la protección," for protection, before her husband hurried her into their waiting car. Nothing unusual, I lied. Just a normal house sale. Every house has its history, Elena, especially in Coyoacán. The walls remember everything. I said goodnight quickly after that, claiming exhaustion from unpacking, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay in our bed listening to the rain in the old house settling around me. At 3:33 a.m. I was still awake when Diego's scream pierced the darkness. I found him sitting bolt upright in his bed, eyes wide but unfocused, seeing something that wasn't there, or at least something I couldn't see. "The lady," he whispered, pointing at his window. "The lady with the children." "There's no one there, mi amor. It was just a dream." But Diego shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face. "She had them on chains, Mama. Little kids on chains like dogs, and their faces." He buried his head in my chest, sobbing. They didn't have eyes, just black holes, and their mouths were sewn shut with black thread. I held him until he fell back asleep, but his words had chilled me to my core. Children have nightmares, I told myself. The move had been stressful for him. New house, new room, new shadows on the walls. It meant nothing. But that night, after I'd finally gotten Diego settled and returned to my own bed, I had the most vivid, horrifying dream of my life. In it, I came home to find our house aged by decades in a single day. The walls were crumbling, covered in black mold that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The blue tiles were cracked and stained with something that looked like dried blood. The jacaranda tree was dead, its branches reaching toward the house like skeletal fingers. I climbed the stairs in the dream, each step creaking ominously under my weight. The air grew thicker as I ascended, filled with the smell of copal incense and something else, something organic and rotting. At the top of the stairs, where our family room should have been, I found an altar. It was elaborate and wrong, built from bones and black candles that burned without consuming. In the center sat a white porcelain plate. On it was Carlos's head, his eyes still moving, his mouth opening and closing, as if trying to warn me of something. Diego's toys surrounded the plate, his stuffed rabbit torn apart, stuffing mixed with what looked like blood and earth. His favorite toy car, the blue one he took everywhere, was crushed and twisted into an impossible shape. But the worst thing, the thing that made me want to scream but found I had no voice, was what sat at the apex of the altar. It was a figure of Christ, but perverted wrong in every way. Instead of eyes, it had a single red orb in the center of its forehead that tracked my movement. Its skin was gray-green like a corpse left in water, mottled with patches of black rot. The mouth was torn open from ear to ear in a grotesque smile that revealed rows of yellowed, pointed teeth. The Cristo's head turned toward me with a sound like breaking pottery. When it spoke, its voice was Roberto's, but layered with something ancient and hungry. "Welcome home, Elena. I've been waiting so long for you to arrive." It raised one impossibly long finger, the bone visible through translucent flesh, and pointed to our dining room table, visible through the doorway. I didn't want to look, but my dream self had no choice. I turned and saw myself laid out on the table like an offering. My chest was open and my own hands held my still-beating heart up toward the ceiling as if in supplication. I woke, gasping, drenched in sweat that felt too cold, too thick, almost oily against my skin. The bedside clock read 3:33 a.m. again, though I was certain hours had passed. My phone buzzed with a message. "Roberto, did you sleep well? My grandmother always said the hours between 3 and 4 a.m. were when the veil was thinnest in that house." Sweet dreams, Elena. How did he know I was awake? I wanted to respond, to demand answers, but my hands shook too badly to type. Outside, the rain had stopped, but in the sudden silence I could hear something else. Footsteps in the hallway outside our bedroom. slow, deliberate steps that paused right outside our door. "Diego," I called out softly. "Mi amor, is that you?" The footsteps stopped. Then after a moment that stretched like eternity, they continued toward Diego's room. I forced myself out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat Carlos kept in our closet. The hallway was empty, but Diego's door was open. I knew I had closed it after calming him down earlier. Inside, Diego was asleep, but standing at the foot of his bed was his stuffed rabbit. It had been in his arms when I'd left him. Now it stood upright, facing the window, as if watching for something or someone. I grabbed Diego and brought him to our bed, locking our bedroom door and pushing the dresser in front of it. I didn't care if I was being irrational. Something was deeply wrong, and it had started the moment Roberto contacted me. The next morning I tried to convince myself it had all been stress and imagination. Diego seemed fine, chattering about his dreams of flying with butterflies, no memory of the lady with the chained children. I made breakfast, attempting normalcy, but kept finding myself checking the windows, double-checking the locks. That's when I noticed the photo on our refrigerator had changed. It was supposed to be the three of us at Xochimilco riding the colorful boats through the canals. But while Carlos and Diego looked normal, my face in the photo was blurred, scratched out, as if someone had taken their fingernails to it repeatedly. When I looked closer, I could see something written in tiny letters across where my face should be, "Pronto serás mía." Soon you will be mine. I tore the photo down and threw it in the trash, but an hour later it was back on the refrigerator, the scratches deeper, the message clearer. That's when I made my second mistake. I messaged Roberto. "We need to talk. Strange things have been happening since you contacted me." His reply was instant. "I know. That's why we need to meet. There are things about that house, about your family's connection to it, that you need to understand. I can help you, Elena. I'm the only one who can." Every instinct screamed at me not to meet him, but the rational part of my mind argued that I needed answers. If he knew something about the house, about why these things were happening, I had to find out. Carlos wouldn't be back for 2 more days. I couldn't handle 2 more nights like the last one. "Where?" I typed. "The house. Tonight." "After Diego's asleep. Some things can only be explained in the place where they have power." I agreed. May God forgive me, I agreed. I told myself I would be careful. I would leave Diego with our neighbor, Senora Martinez. I would have my phone ready to call the police. I would meet Roberto, get answers, and then cut him out of our lives forever. But that afternoon, as I was preparing to take Diego to the neighbor's house, he said something that stopped me cold. "Mama, the man in my room says we can't leave tonight. He says his brother is coming to visit and it would be rude not to be here." "What man, Diego? There's no man in your room." Diego looked at me with those innocent brown eyes and said matter-of-factly, "The one who looks like smoke. He's been here since we moved in, but he only started talking after you talked to his brother on the computer. He says his name is Miguel and he's very sorry for what's about to happen." The room spun around me. Miguel. Roberto's dead brother. It couldn't be possible, but nothing about the last 24 hours had been possible. I grabbed Diego and started heading for the door, but it slammed shut before we could reach it. Every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously, the sound like gunshots in the quiet afternoon. My phone buzzed. "Roberto." "Running would be very rude, Elena. We have so much to discuss about your new home. Did you know your grandmother once lived there too? Before she died in that very house, the walls remember everything, Elena. Everything." That's when I understood this wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Roberto had orchestrated our move to this house, somehow had been planning this for God knows how long. And now as the sun began to set and shadows lengthened across our floors like reaching fingers, I realized we were trapped in whatever sick game he had designed. The first phase of my nightmare was ending, but I could feel in my bones that something far worse was about to begin. The following week, Roberto began visiting our house uninvited. The first time he showed up on a Tuesday afternoon while I was hanging laundry in the backyard. I heard the front gate creak open. that distinctive squeal of rusted metal that we hadn't fixed yet. And there he was, walking up our path as if he belonged there. "Roberto, what are you doing here?" I tried to keep my voice steady, but my hands gripped Diego's wet shirt so tightly that water ran down my arms. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd stop by to see the old place." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were scanning our yard, taking inventory of every detail. "My grandmother planted that guava tree, you know. She said it would protect the house from evil spirits." Ironic, isn't it? Diego was at school, thank God. Carlos was in Guadalajara again, his third trip that month. The construction project had complications, he said, but now I wondered if the house itself was pushing him away, creating reasons for him to leave. "I'm quite busy, Roberto. Perhaps we could arrange a proper visit when Carlos is home." "Carlos won't be back until Thursday," he said casually, examining the guava tree's bark. "The Guadalajara project has issues with the foundation, unstable ground, very dangerous if not handled correctly." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told anyone about Carlos's extended trip. He'd only called me that morning to inform me about the delay. "How do you know about Carlos's work?" Roberto turned to me, and for a moment I saw something shift in his face. Like another face was underneath trying to push through the skin. "Mexico City is smaller than you think, Elena. People talk, especially in construction. One bad accident, one small mistake, and a man could lose everything. His job, his family, his life." The threat was unmistakable. I wanted to scream at him to leave, but the words stuck in my throat like broken glass. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Would you like some coffee?" How kind. Yes, I would love that. He followed me into the house, and I felt like I was leading a wolf into the sheep pen. As I prepared coffee with trembling hands, Roberto wandered through our living room, touching things. Our family photos, Diego's toys, the crucifix Carlos's mother had given us as a wedding gift. Everywhere his fingers landed seemed to leave an invisible mark, a wrongness that lingered in the air. "You know, Elena, you look exactly like your grandmother did at your age." He picked up our wedding photo, tracing my face with his index finger. "She lived in this house in 1962. Did you know that?" "That's impossible. My grandmother never lived in Mexico City." "Oh, but she did. For 3 months. A secret that died with her." He set the photo down, but now my face in it looked distorted. The smile too wide, the eyes too dark. She came here to escape something or someone. But some things follow you anywhere. Some connections transcend death itself. I handed him the coffee, desperate for him to drink it and leave. But he just held the cup, letting the steam rise between us like a barrier. "Your grandmother made a deal in this house," he continued. "A trade. Her bloodline for protection. But deals like that don't die with the deal maker. They pass down, waiting for the right moment to collect, the right catalyst to activate them. You're not making any sense. Please, I need you to leave." "Leave." He laughed, and the sound was doubled, as if 2 voices were laughing from his throat. "Elena, I've been waiting 12 years for you to come to this house." "Do you think it was coincidence that it came on the market just when you were looking? That the sellers accepted your first offer, that Carlos suddenly got all that work in Guadalajara?" He stood up, leaving the coffee untouched, and moved closer to me. I backed against the kitchen counter, my hand finding the knife block behind me. "Miguel never overdosed," Roberto whispered close enough that I could smell his breath. It reeked of earth and copper like freshly turned grave soil. "He was sacrificed. But the ritual was incomplete. He needed an anchor in this world, someone he had loved. You, Elena, always you. Miguel was my friend, nothing more. But he loved you, desperately, silently. And in Palo Mayombe, unrequited love is the most powerful offering of all." His hand reached out to touch my face, and where his fingers grazed my cheek, the skin went numb. He's been waiting in the walls of this house, growing stronger, feeding on the energy of everyone who lived here. "But now you're here, the missing piece, and we can finally complete what was started." I slapped his hand away and grabbed a knife from the block. "Get out, now." or I call the police." Roberto stepped back, smiling, that horrible, too-wide smile. "The police, yes, call them. Tell them about the voices in the walls, the moving photographs, the ghost of my dead brother. I'm sure they'll be very helpful." He walked to the door, then paused. "Oh, Elena, you might want to check on Diego at school. Sometimes accidents happen on playgrounds. Children fall, bones break, especially when their mothers don't cooperate." I ran to my phone as soon as he left, calling the school in a panic. Diego was fine, they assured me, playing happily with his friends. But when I picked him up that afternoon, his teacher pulled me aside. "Senora, I'm a bit concerned. Diego has been drawing some disturbing pictures." She showed me his artwork from that day, page after page of crude drawings, showing a woman surrounded by shadows, a small boy in a cage, and everywhere watching over it all, a figure with one red eye in the center of its forehead. "He says it's his new friend," the teacher continued, "the one who visits at night. Perhaps you should consider having him speak with the school counselor." That night, after Carlos called to say he'd be delayed another 2 days, "Unexpected structural problems," he said, sounding exhausted and confused. I double-checked every lock, placed salt lines at the windows and doors, a superstition my grandmother had taught me, and brought Diego into bed with me. At 3:13 a.m. the footsteps began again, but this time they weren't in the hallway. They were on the roof directly above our bedroom. Slow, measured steps, as if someone was pacing back and forth. Then dragging sounds like something heavy being pulled across the tiles. Diego whimpered in his sleep, pressing closer to me. "The lady is back," he mumbled, still unconscious. "She wants to come in. Her children are so hungry." The footsteps stopped directly above us. Then, impossibly, I heard Roberto's voice, muffled but clear through the ceiling. "Let me in, Elena. Let's finish what was started." I grabbed my phone to call Carlos, anyone, but the screen showed no signal. The battery was full, but every call failed, every message refused to send. We were cut off. That's when the scratching started, inside the walls. It sounded like fingernails on wood, desperate, frantic. The sound traveled from the ceiling down through the walls surrounding us. In the darkness, I could see Diego's drawings from school coming to life in my mind. The shadows, the cage, the watching eye. The bedroom door handle began to turn slowly, even though I had locked it and pushed the dresser against it. The dresser scraped against the floor as something pushed from the other side. Something strong, something that shouldn't exist. "Mama," Diego said, fully awake now, his eyes reflecting a light that wasn't there. "Miguel says he's sorry. He says his brother made him do bad things. He says the only way to make it stop is to give Roberto what he wants." "What does he want, mi amor?" Diego looked at me with eyes that seemed far too old, too knowing. "You, Mama. He wants you to die in this house like your grandmother should have. He says it's the only way to complete the circle." The dresser moved another inch. Through the gap under the door, I could see shadows that moved independently of any light source, reaching toward us like liquid darkness. The crucifix on our wall began to spin slowly, then faster, until it was a blur. Then it burst into flames, cold blue flames that gave no heat but filled the room with the smell of sulfur. "Tomorrow," Diego said in a voice that wasn't quite his own. "Roberto will come tomorrow while Papa is gone. He'll bring something to drink, something special. Miguel says whatever you do, don't drink it. It will make you sleep, and when you sleep, you won't wake up the same." The warnings were too late. Everything Roberto had planned was already in motion. As the dresser finally gave way and our bedroom door swung open to reveal nothing but impenetrable darkness, I realized we weren't dealing with a mere haunting. This was something orchestrated, something that had been planned before we ever set foot in this house. The darkness poured into our room like water, and somewhere in it I could hear Roberto laughing. Or was it Miguel crying? In that moment, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. When morning finally came, though I wasn't sure if we had slept or simply lost time, I found muddy footprints throughout the house. They led from the front door to Diego's room, circled his bed 3 times, then went to the kitchen. On the counter was a bottle of amber liquid I had never seen before with a note, "For tomorrow's visit. We'll toast to new beginnings. R." I threw the bottle in the garbage, then thought better of it and took it outside to the dumpster down the street. But when I returned to the house, the bottle was back on the counter, unopened, waiting. The note had changed. "You can't throw away fate, Elena." That evening, August 15th, 2017, Carlos called to say he'd have to stay in Guadalajara for the rest of the week. His voice sounded wrong, distant, as if he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "There was an accident at the site," he said. "A beam fell. Almost killed me, Elena. If I hadn't stepped aside at the last second, the foreman says I need to stay to file reports, insurance claims. I'm so sorry, mi amor." After I hung up, Diego looked at me from the dinner table where he'd been coloring. "Papa won't be home tomorrow," he said simply. "Roberto knows. He's always known." I wanted to pack our things and leave that night, but every time I tried to gather our belongings, I felt an overwhelming exhaustion, as if the house itself was draining my will. Diego seemed unaffected playing with his toys, but I noticed he kept arranging them in strange patterns, circles within circles, with his stuffed rabbit always at the center. "Miguel taught me," he said when I asked. "He says it's protection, but it won't work tomorrow. Tomorrow the door opens all the way." That night I made a decision. I would take Diego to his grandmother's in the morning, then face Roberto alone. Whatever he planned, I wouldn't let my son be there to witness it. But when morning came, Diego was burning with fever 40 degrees Celsius. He was delirious, speaking in languages I didn't recognize, his eyes rolling back to show only whites. I couldn't move him. The hospital said to wait for an ambulance, but none came. Every call I made seemed to disappear into static. We were trapped, and Roberto was coming. At 7:15 p.m. on August 15th, I heard his car pull up outside. Diego's fever had broken suddenly an hour before, leaving him weak but lucid. I had sent him to stay in his room, doors locked, with instructions not to come out no matter what he heard. I stood in my living room waiting. I had grabbed a kitchen knife, Carlos's baseball bat, even the small can of pepper spray from my purse. Useless weapons against what I suspected was coming, but they made me feel less helpless. Roberto didn't knock. The door simply opened, despite being locked and deadbolted. He walked in carrying 2 glasses and a bottle, the same amber bottle I'd thrown away. "Elena," he said, his voice harmonizing with itself in an impossible way, "it's time we had that drink." Behind him the door slammed shut with enough force to crack the frame. Through the windows I could see darkness falling too fast, as if night was rushing to arrive early just for this moment. And in that unnatural twilight I could swear I saw faces pressed against the glass, children's faces with sewn-shut mouths and empty eye sockets, just as Diego had described. The second phase of my nightmare was ending, but I knew with horrible certainty that the worst was yet to come. "Drink," Roberto said, pouring the amber liquid into both glasses. The smell that rose from it was sweet and cloying, like rotting fruit mixed with church incense. "It's a special recipe. My grandmother's. She learned it from the brujos in Veracruz." "I'm not drinking anything you give me." I kept the kitchen knife visible in my hand, though we both knew it was a meaningless gesture. "Oh, Elena." "You already have." He smiled, and his teeth looked too sharp in the dim light. "Every time you've made coffee in this house, every glass of water from your tap, this house has been feeding you small doses since you arrived. Tonight we just finished what's been started." My mind reeled. The constant fatigue, the heavy sleep, the strange dreams. Had it all been poisoning? I thought about Diego's fever, the way Carlos kept having to leave, the isolation that had wrapped around us like a shroud. "What do you want from me?" "Want?" Roberto stood, and as he did, the shadows in the room seemed to stand with him, towering dark figures that shouldn't exist in the lamplight. "I want what was promised, what your grandmother ran from but could never escape. You see, Elena, some bloodlines carry debts, spiritual debts that must be paid." He moved closer, and I backed toward the stairs, hoping to get to Diego to protect him somehow. But Roberto shook his head. He's already asleep. Such a sweet child, he won't feel a thing. Children's souls are so pure they make excellent offerings. You touch him and you'll what kill me. He laughed, that doubled voice echoing off our walls. Elena, I've been dead since the night Miguel died. We both have. This body is just a vessel, now borrowed time made flesh. But tonight, with your blood on the altar, with your soul bound to this house, we become eternal. That's when I heard it, Diego screaming upstairs, not in fear, but in pain. I ran, dropping everything, Roberto's laughter following me up the stairs. Diego's door was still locked, but the screaming continued. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so badly I dropped it twice. When I finally got the door open, Diego was suspended 3 feet above his bed, his body rigid, his eyes rolled back completely white. The temperature in the room was so cold I could see my breath. On the walls, written in what looked like ash, were symbols I didn't recognize, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Mama!" Diego gasped, his voice strangled. "The lady! She's here! She brought the children!" I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, small cold presences filling the room. The air was thick with the smell of earth and decay. Diego's toys were arranged in a perfect circle on the floor, and in the center was his stuffed rabbit, but it was wrong. Its button eyes were weeping real blood, and its mouth was moving, whispering words I couldn't understand. Roberto appeared in the doorway behind me. "The veil is so thin here, your grandmother knew that. It's why she chose this house for the ritual." But she was weak. She ran before completing it, left the door open just a crack. We've been waiting in that crack for 55 years, Elena, waiting for her blood to return. Diego dropped to the bed unconscious but breathing. I ran to him, but the moment I entered the circle of toys, the world changed. The room stretched and distorted. The walls became transparent, and through them I could see other rooms, other times. I saw my grandmother as a young woman standing in this same room holding a baby. My mother. She was crying, begging something I couldn't see for forgiveness. "She made a deal." Roberto's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Her firstborn daughter for power, for protection from something even worse than us. But she cheated. She fled to Guanajuato, had your mother there, thinking distance would break the contract. But blood calls to blood, Elena. And now you've brought the bloodline home." The vision shifted. I saw Roberto and Miguel as teenagers, but wrong, their faces were older, ancient, wearing their young bodies like ill-fitting clothes. They stood around a circle of candles, Miguel lying in the center, convulsing as something dark poured into him from the symbols drawn on the floor. "We needed a vessel," Roberto explained, though his lips didn't move. "Miguel volunteered. He thought he could control it, use it to win your love. But the things that live between worlds don't care about human love. They only care about the contracts written in blood and soul." The room snapped back to normal, but Diego was gone. His bed was empty, the sheets cold as if he'd never been there at all. I screamed his name, running through the house, Roberto following at a leisurely pace. I found Diego in the basement. A part of the house we'd never used, had barely even acknowledged existed. He was standing in front of a wall covered in photographs. Not just any photographs, pictures of me throughout my life. As a baby, a child, a teenager at my wedding. Pictures taken from angles that suggested the photographer had been inside my homes, watching me sleep, watching me live. And in every photo, if you looked closely, there was a shadow that didn't belong, a dark figure just out of focus. 32 years of watching, Roberto said from the stairs, waiting for the right moment. You had to come here willingly. You had to have a child, innocent blood to seal the binding, and your husband had to be absent. The trinity of conditions. Diego turned to look at me, and his eyes were completely black. When he spoke, it was in Miguel's voice. "I loved you, Elena. I still do. That's why I'm sorry for what Roberto is about to do." The floor beneath me gave way, not physically but spiritually. I felt myself sinking into something cold and viscous like invisible tar. My feet were stuck, then my legs. The more I struggled, the faster I sank. Diego Miguel watched with those black eyes, tears of ink running down his cheeks. "The binding requires consent," Roberto said, pulling out an ancient-looking knife, its blade black with age. "But consent can be manufactured. Every night you've slept in this house, you've been saying yes in your dreams. Every meal you've cooked, every breath you've taken has been agreement. And now, with your son as witness, we complete what your grandmother started." That's when I saw it, really saw it for the first time, the thing that Roberto had become. His human shape was just a projection, a shadow cast by something immense and wrong. Behind him, filling the basement, was a creature of smoke and eyes, hundreds of red eyes that all focused on me. It had too many mouths, all of them whispering in languages that predated words, and at its center, like a grotesque heart, was Miguel's face, twisted in eternal agony. "No!" I screamed, not at Roberto, but at the house itself. "I revoke consent. I reject the contract. This bloodline owes you nothing." The sinking stopped. Roberto's expression changed from confidence to rage. "You can't refuse. The preparations are complete." My grandmother refused. She ran, and I refuse now. I pulled myself from the invisible tar through sheer will, crawling toward Diego. Whatever she promised, I break it. Whatever door she opened, I close it. The house began to shake. Not like an earthquake, but like something breathing, gasping. The photographs on the wall burst into flames. Cold blue flames that gave no heat. Roberto screamed, his form flickering between human and monster. That's when I heard her voice, my grandmother's voice, young and strong. "Mia, the salt! Remember the salt!" The salt lines I'd placed at the windows and doors. I grabbed Diego, his body limp and cold, and ran for the stairs. Roberto followed, no longer pretending to be human. He was shadow and teeth and reaching claws. The house itself fought me, doors slamming, walls stretching, stairs multiplying. But I held Diego tight and remembered my grandmother's other lessons, the prayers she'd taught me, the old words of protection. Santa Maria Madre de Dios. I gasped, each word burning my throat as if I was speaking fire. Protegenos del mal. Roberto shrieked, the sound shattering every piece of glass in the house. But it gave me enough time to reach the kitchen, where I'd hidden more than just salt. Agua bendita from the church blessed on Easter Sunday, copal incense from the market, and something else, something I'd grabbed on instinct when packing for the move. My grandmother's rosary, the one she'd clutched as she died. I threw the holy water behind us, and where it landed, Roberto's shadow form sizzled and retreated. But he was still coming, still reaching for us with tendrils of darkness that seemed to eat the light itself. That's when Diego opened his eyes, his own eyes brown and frightened. "Mama, we have to find it. The thing in the wall." "Miguel says it's the only way." "What thing?" "The nganga, the cauldron. It's in the wall behind the refrigerator. That's where Roberto keeps Miguel's soul. Break it and Miguel will be free. Break it and the contract breaks too." I ran to the kitchen, Roberto's roar of rage shaking dust from the ceiling. The refrigerator was heavy, but adrenaline gave me strength. Behind it, the wall looked normal, but when I pressed my grandmother's rosary against it, the plaster cracked and fell away, revealing a hidden space. Inside was horror made manifest. A black iron cauldron no bigger than a soup pot, filled with things I didn't want to identify. Bones, certainly. Hair. Photographs of me, of Diego, of Carlos, all partially submerged in a liquid that looked like oil but moved like it was alive. And at the center, wrapped in red cloth, was something that pulsed like a heart. "Don't touch it," Roberto materialized in the doorway, his form solidifying in desperation. "You don't know what you're doing. Without the nganga, Miguel doesn't go free. He goes to them, the things that live in the spaces between. They'll take him, and they'll take your son's soul as payment for breaking the contract." I hesitated. Diego clung to my leg, shaking. "Mama, Miguel says it's okay. He says he's tired. He wants to rest. He says to tell you he's sorry and that real love means letting go." With my grandmother's rosary wrapped around my hand, I reached into the cauldron. The moment my fingers touched the pulsing cloth bundle, the world exploded into sensation. I felt Miguel's pain, 12 years of being trapped between life and death. I felt Roberto's obsession, his desperate need to possess what he could never have. I felt my grandmother's terror as she ran from this house pregnant with my mother, leaving behind a promise she couldn't keep. But I also felt something else: love. Miguel's genuine love, twisted and corrupted by his brother's magic, but still pure at its core. And that love gave me the strength to close my hand around the bundle and pull. The nganga shattered in my grip, its contents turning to ash instantly. Roberto screamed, his form dissolving, reaching for me with hands that no longer existed. "You don't know what you've done. The door is open. They're coming through." And he was right. Through the hole where the nganga had been, something else was entering our world. Not Roberto's controlled evil, but something wild and hungry and ancient. The wall began to bulge outward like something massive was pushing through from the other side. That's when I heard sirens, police, ambulance, fire trucks, all of them racing toward our house. Later, I learned that every neighbor for blocks had called 911 at the same moment, reporting screams, explosions, lights that shouldn't exist. But in that moment, all I knew was that we had to get out. I grabbed Diego and ran for the door, the house collapsing in on itself behind us, not physically, but spiritually folding into spaces that shouldn't exist. We burst out onto our front lawn just as the emergency vehicles arrived. Behind us, the house stood intact but wrong. Every window was black, not dark, but black, as if they opened onto void. And in the doorway, just for a moment, I saw Miguel. Not the twisted thing Roberto had made him, but Miguel as he'd been, young, sad, finally free. He raised one hand in goodbye, then dissolved into light. The police found Roberto's body in his apartment across the city. He'd been dead for 3 days, they said, though multiple witnesses had seen him moving around, driving his car, living his life. The coroner couldn't explain it. The body showed signs of having been dead much longer, years maybe. But that was impossible, wasn't it? We stayed in a hotel that night, Diego burning with fever again, delirious. But this time his ravings were different. "The door is still open, Mama." Roberto opened it, but breaking the nganga didn't close it. It made it wider. And now they know where we are. The things that your grandmother was running from, they're coming. I held my son and prayed to every saint I could remember, but even then, I knew our ordeal wasn't over. It had only changed form. The third phase of my nightmare was ending, but I could feel the fourth beginning lurking just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for the right moment to strike. And through it all, I could hear Roberto's last words echoing, "The door is open. They're coming through." We moved to Puebla the next morning. Carlos had rushed back from Guadalajara, finding us at the Hotel Diego, still burning with fever, me unable to speak coherently about what had happened. The police had questions about Roberto's body, about the strange readings their equipment showed at our house, about the neighbors' reports of impossible lights and sounds. But what could I tell them that they would believe the house in Coyoacán was deemed structurally unsound, though no inspector could explain why? The walls were solid, the foundation intact. But something about the space itself was wrong. Electronics malfunctioned inside. Compasses spun wildly. 3 different inspection teams reported feeling violently ill within minutes of entering. The city condemned it within a week. For 6 months in Puebla, we almost believed it was over. Diego recovered from his fever, stopped drawing, disturbing pictures, slept through the night without screaming. Carlos found work locally, no more mysterious trips to Guadalajara. I started to breathe again, to believe that breaking the nganga had truly ended it. Then, on November 23, 2018, Carlos showed me his phone at breakfast. "Did you see this? That strange man who used to visit us? Roberto. He died in a car accident yesterday." My coffee cup shattered in my hand. "That's impossible. Roberto died over a year ago. The police found his body in his apartment." Carlos looked at me strangely. What are you talking about? I saw him last month at the hardware store. He asked about you, about Diego. Said he was planning to reach out soon. The room spun. How could Carlos have seen Roberto? How could anyone have unless what died in that apartment wasn't Roberto at all, but just another vessel, another borrowed body? That night, Diego came to our room at exactly 3:33 a.m. His eyes were clear, fully awake, but his voice was flat, emotionless. "Mama, I need to show you something." He led us to his toy chest, which he'd insisted on bringing from the old house, despite my protests. Inside, buried beneath his other toys, was his stuffed rabbit, the one that had stood at the foot of his bed that night. The one whose eyes had wept blood, but now it was different. Sewn into its belly was a small pocket I'd never seen before, and inside that pocket was a folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, I unfolded it. It was a photograph of our family at the old house, one I didn't remember taking. We were all asleep in our beds, photographed from above, as if someone had been floating on the ceiling, and standing next to each of our sleeping forms were shadows human-shaped, but wrong, too tall joints bending in impossible directions. On the back in Roberto's handwriting, "Death is just a doorway. The contract isn't broken, only transferred. See you soon." I wanted to burn it, but the moment I held it to the candle flame, Diego screamed as if he was the one burning. A red mark appeared on his arm, blistering like a burn. I dropped the photo, and the mark faded, leaving only the memory of pain. "We can't destroy it," Diego said, his voice too knowing for a 5-year-old. "It's connected to me now. Roberto made sure of that before he changed bodies. Changed bodies. He's done it before, Mama. Many times. The Roberto you knew was just the latest. He's been other people worn other faces, but the thing inside is ancient. It was waiting in that house before your grandmother ever arrived. It made the deal with her, but she was just one in a long line, and now it needs a new host." That's when we heard the news. Roberto's funeral would be in 3 days, closed casket given the state of the body after the accident. But his lawyer had contacted us. Roberto had left something for Diego in his will, a trust fund accessible when Diego turned 18, and a house, the house in Coyoacán. "We're not going to the funeral," I said immediately. But Diego shook his head. "We have to. If we don't, he'll just keep coming. Different faces, different names, but always him, always hunting us. The only way to end it is to face him one last time." "He's dead, Diego, actually dead this time." "No, Mama. He's between. Waiting to jump to a new host at the funeral. That's why he made sure we'd come. He needs someone with the right bloodline to agree to let him in. And if it's not willing, he'll take Diego." The funeral was held at the Panteón de Dolores, one of Mexico City's oldest cemeteries. Despite everything, we went. I don't know why. Perhaps because Diego was right. Perhaps because I needed to see for myself that Roberto was truly gone. Perhaps because something was compelling us to attend, pulling us like fish on a line. The ceremony was small. A few distant relatives, some people I didn't recognize in us. The priest seemed nervous, stumbling over the prayers, his hands shaking as he sprinkled holy water on the closed casket. The water hissed when it hit the wood steam rising in the cold November air. As they lowered the casket into the ground, Diego squeezed my hand. "He's here," he whispered. "Not in the box. Standing right behind you." I didn't turn. I couldn't. But I felt it. Cold breath on my neck, the smell of earth and copper, the weight of eyes that weren't quite human. "Last chance," Roberto's voice, but speaking from no visible source. "Accept the contract willingly and Diego goes free. Refuse and I'd take him anyway. The bloodline must continue. The door must stay open." "What door?" I whispered Carlos, looking at me strangely, unable to hear what I was hearing. "The door your grandmother opened when she made the first deal. The door between the living and the dead. It's been feeding on your family for 3 generations, growing wider with each death, each soul that passes through. Miguel was just the beginning. There are so many others waiting to come through. And they're hungry, Elena, so very hungry." The gravediggers began shoveling earth onto the casket. With each shovelful, I felt something loosening like a rope slowly fraying. Diego's grip on my hand tightened painfully. "Mama, look at the people." I looked around the funeral. The other attendees, the ones I didn't recognize, were wrong. Their faces were too static, like masks. Their eyes didn't blink. And their shadows were facing the wrong direction, all pointing toward the grave, regardless of where the sun was. "They're all him," Diego whispered. "All the bodies he's worn, all the people he's been, they're here to witness the transfer." The last shovelful of earth hit the casket and everything went silent. Not quiet silent. No wind, no birds, no sound of the city beyond the cemetery walls. In that impossible silence, Roberto materialized fully standing on his own grave. But it wasn't the Roberto I knew. It was all of them. Dozens of faces superimposed on each other, flickering like a broken television. Each face from a different era, different lifetime. And behind them all, barely visible, was something else. The real thing. The ancient hunger that had worn those faces like masks. "Choose," it said with all those mouths at once, "you or the boy." That's when I remembered something my grandmother had whispered to me as she was dying, words that hadn't made sense at the time. "Mia, the contracts only have power if you believe in them. The doors only open if you acknowledge they exist. The dead only walk if the living give them permission." I stood up, pulling Diego with me. "I choose neither. I don't believe in your contract. I don't acknowledge your door, and I give you no permission to exist in our world." Roberto's many faces contorted in rage. "You can't simply choose not to believe I'm standing right here." "Are you?" I asked, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt powerful. "Or are you just shadows and suggestion? Just the echo of my grandmother's fear passed down through stories and superstition?" The masked figures around the funeral began to flicker, their edges becoming uncertain. Roberto himself seemed to be losing cohesion, his many faces sliding apart from each other. "The Nganga was real," he screamed. "The photographs were real. The bruises on your body were real." "Real events can have false meanings," I said, remembering something from a psychology class years ago. "Correlation without causation. Manipulation and drugs, not magic. Crime, not curses." Diego looked up at me, and for a moment his eyes flickered black. "Mama, if you stop believing, I'll disappear too. The part of me that sees them, that knows them, it'll die." I knelt beside my son. "Maybe that's for the best, mi amor. Maybe it's time to let that part go." Roberto lunged for us, but his hands passed through like mist. The other figures were fading, becoming transparent. The cemetery was starting to return to normal, sounds filtering back in shadows, pointing in proper directions. "This isn't over." Roberto's voice was fading, becoming an echo. "The bloodline remembers. The house remembers. You can pretend to forget, but—" And then he was gone. Simply gone. The funeral continued as if nothing had happened, the priest finishing his prayers, the mourners dispersing. Carlos hadn't seen any of it. To him, it had been a normal, quiet funeral. We went home to Puebla. Diego slept for 3 days straight, and when he woke, he didn't remember. Roberto didn't remember the house in Coyoacan, didn't remember any of it. The drawings he'd made were blank paper. The photographs were just normal family photos. Even his stuffed rabbit was just a toy, no hidden pocket, no mysterious photo. I chose to believe it was over. I chose to believe we were free. But sometimes late at night, I check my phone and find messages in my sent folder that I didn't write. Messages to numbers that don't exist, saying things like, "The door is still open," and "Blood remembers what the mind forgets," and "See you soon." And once, just once, I found a message with a video attached. It was our house in Puebla, filmed from inside Diego's room while he slept. The timestamp was from an hour when Carlos and I were both asleep. In the video, Diego sits up, eyes closed, still sleeping, and says clearly, "Mama doesn't believe anymore, but I do. I'll always believe. And when I turn 18, the house will be mine. The door will open wide, and everyone who's waiting will come through." The video deleted itself before I could show it to anyone. There's no evidence it ever existed. Diego is 11 now. 7 more years until he turns 18. 7 more years until the house in Coyoacan becomes his. I tell myself I don't believe in curses. I tell myself there's nothing to fear. But every night I check his room at 3:33 a.m. And every night his stuffed rabbit is in a different position, watching, waiting. The door may be closed, but it's never locked. And some promises once made can never be truly broken. They just wait for the next generation to remember.